I'm grateful because you've come together as a group. Interestingly, if you like, I'm not here because this was my choice. You very kindly asked me to become patron of your organizations. So
everyone is talking about what Laura Lopes said. Nobody is talking about what drove her to say it. And that difference, that gap between the headline and the truth, is exactly where this story lives. Today, we are going inside one of the most quietly explosive moments to rock the British royal family in recent memory. Because yes, William is furious, and yes, his fury is completely understandable. But if you think this story begins and ends with one careless comment, you are missing everything that actually matters. And if this is already landing differently than what you expected, do not go anywhere. It gets heavier before it gets beautiful. This is exactly what we do here. We do not let the stories that matter disappear quietly into a news cycle. Subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a video like this. I share it with someone who follows the royals, and drop a comment telling me what you already think. I read every single one. Because before we talk about what happened, we need to talk about who Laura Lopes actually is. Not the tabloid version, not the footnote in someone else's story. The real woman. Laura was born in 1978 to Camilla and her then-husband, British Army officer Andrew Parker Bowles. She did not lean into her mother's eventual royal connections. She built something of her own, managing London galleries, co-founding her own fine art space in Belgravia, building a professional reputation entirely separate from the palace. She married, raised 3 children, and lived, by every visible measure, a self-sufficient and dignified private life. But here is the detail that has never sat right with me. Her daughter Eliza was a bridesmaid at William and Catherine's wedding in 2011. Her twin boys, Gus and Louis, were pages of honor at King Charles's coronation in 2023. Her children have stood on the Buckingham Palace balcony. They are woven into the visual fabric of this monarchy. And Laura herself? No title, no working royal role, no formal acknowledgement of where she stands within the institution her children help represent. Her kids walk through a door that has never officially been opened for her. Sit with that for a moment, because that is not a minor detail. That is the foundation of everything that follows. To understand the tension between Laura and William, you cannot start with last week. You have to go back to April 2005, the wedding of Charles and Camilla, an event that was, depending on which side of the family you occupied, either a long overdue vindication or a deeply painful reopening of wounds that had never properly closed. For William, that wedding meant watching his father formally choose the woman many held responsible for the destruction of his mother's marriage. Diana had suffered publicly, had unraveled publicly, and had died while the world watched. And now the woman connected to all of that was being given a title, a crown, and a permanent seat at the family table. For Laura, standing in that same room, the emotion ran in the exact opposite direction. Her mother had spent years being vilified, mocked in headlines, called names, treated as the villain in a love story the public had already decided how to judge. And finally, that was over. Finally, Camilla was being recognized as worthy, as chosen, as the woman the king had always wanted. So 2 people, 1 ceremony, completely opposite heartbreaks. And according to royal author Katie Nicholl, they did not manage those emotions quietly. There were confrontations, real ones. William reportedly blamed Camilla directly. Laura, reaching her limit, told him that his father had ruined her life. These were not civilized disagreements. They were 2 young people defending their parents with the kind of rawness that leaves marks. A working peace eventually developed. Her children attended his ceremonies. She attended his wedding. But a working peace is not the same as healed ground, and the ground, it turns out, was still fragile. Now we have to talk about Princess Anne. And I need you to understand her full significance before we go any further, because without it, William's reaction makes no sense. In 2025, Princess Anne completed 478 public engagements, Not glamorous ones, not the kind that generate fashion coverage or viral moments. The unglamorous, essential kind: hospital visits, institutional commitments, representing the crown in rooms where no camera crew follows. Royal expert Richard Fitzwilliams has described her as absolutely pivotal to maintaining public support for the monarchy. Not merely useful, but essential to its survival. Body language expert Darren Stanton stated plainly that William and Anne together represent the institution's future. But strip away the numbers and the expert quotes, and you arrive at something more important. Anne is the one person in William's family who has never once leveraged their relationship for personal gain, never positioned herself strategically, never offered him flattery designed to secure access. She tells him the truth, sometimes bluntly, sometimes uncomfortably. And in a family where almost every relationship carries an agenda, that kind of honesty is not just rare, it is irreplaceable. When the Sussex crisis threatened to fracture the monarchy publicly, Anne reportedly told William to look forward, not sideways. She has been his anchor through media storms about his wife, distance from his brother, and the weight of knowing the crown is coming. She is not on the periphery of his emotional world. She is the load-bearing wall of it. So when a comment dismissing her legacy drifted across that room, William did not simply hear an insult to his aunt. He heard an attack on the one relationship in his family he has never had to protect, manage, or second-guess. And that is a different kind of fury entirely. The gathering itself was private and, by royal standards, relaxed. No cameras, no formal agenda, no press pool waiting outside. The kind of afternoon where people lower their guard just enough to stop monitoring every word before releasing it. Laura was there. Anne was there. William was there. Laura made a comment about Princess Anne's approach to public duty. Those who were present describe it as offhand, perhaps intended as wit, perhaps genuine frustration wearing the mask of analysis. Whatever the intention, the effect was unmistakable. William's expression shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, just closed. Laura, by some accounts, noticed, made a light follow-up remark, felt for a moment that the atmosphere had recovered. It had not recovered, because William had already made a quiet internal decision. And in the royal world, the quiet decisions are always the ones that last. Here is where I need you to stay with me. Because the question I have not been able to shake, the one that every mainstream royal commentator is walking straight past, is not what Laura said. It is why. This is a woman who has spent 20 years being invisible inside one of the most visible families on earth. Her mother is the Queen. Her stepfather is the King. And yet Laura holds no title, carries no institutional designation, and has no formal protection within the structure she has spent her entire adult life carefully navigating. Even the Christmas arrangements reflect it, an alternating schedule at Sandringham every other year. Her brother matter-of-factly confirming it to the press as though it is the most natural thing in the world. 1 year in, 1 year out. Not quite family, not quite separate. What does 2 decades of that feel like? What builds up in a person who has been gracious and careful and largely silent while watching her own children become more formally embedded in the institution than she herself has ever been allowed to be? I am not arguing that the comment was appropriate. Princess Anne's contribution to this monarchy is beyond serious criticism, and anyone in that room should have known better than to speak carelessly about her. But I will not flatten this into a simple story of disrespect without asking what was sitting underneath that moment. Because the honest answer matters, both for what it says about Laura and for what it demands of William. And that brings us to the moral center of this entire situation. William has a choice in front of him. 2 very different roads, and I think it matters enormously which one he takes. Accountability looks like this. The comment was wrong. That is acknowledged directly. The relationship recalibrates with new clarity, and life continues. Hard, yes, Uncomfortable, certainly, but honest and proportionate. Punishment looks like this. The doors that Laura was already barely allowed through start closing, not with an announcement, not with a confrontation, with silence, with invitations that stop arriving, with a warmth in certain interactions that cools so gradually she might spend months wondering if she is imagining it. With her children's names quietly reconsidered for events they had previously been included in. William is not a man who erupts publicly. He is a man who remembers privately. And in an institution built on unspoken hierarchies, the second version of justice, the silent kind, is the most devastating precisely because there is no conversation to be had, no apology that can reach it, no way to even confirm it is happening until the damage is already done. Here is the part that demands honesty. If William's anger is genuinely and solely about protecting Princess Anne's honor, then accountability is the proportionate response. But if that anger is also carrying the weight of everything unresolved, the 2005 confrontations, the grief about Diana, the complicated feelings about Camilla's ascent, that 20 years of polite royal gatherings never fully dissolved, then Laura Lopes is not simply answering for one unguarded sentence. She is being made to absorb the cost of a debt she did not entirely create. And that would be the real injustice inside this story. But here is the part of this story that I think changes everything. The part nobody is considering. What would Princess Anne actually want here? Anne is not a woman who traffics in grudges or scores points through exclusion. She is exacting about standards, yes. Uncompromising about duty, absolutely. But she is also the most institutionally pragmatic member of the Windsor family. She has watched this family fracture publicly and repeatedly over the past decade. And she understands at a level most people never reach that every crack in the foundation costs the monarchy something it cannot always recover. If Princess Anne were asked, privately, directly, honestly, whether she wanted Laura Lopes edged out of whatever fragile place she had quietly occupied in this family, every single thing we know about her character suggests the answer would be no. Not out of warmth toward Laura specifically. Out of wisdom about what unnecessary fractures cost institutions that are already under pressure. The bitter irony at the heart of this entire situation is that the woman whose honor is being defended may fundamentally disagree with how that defense is being conducted. And the question that now hangs over everything is whether William, in the heat of his fury, is genuinely acting in Anne's interest, or whether he is flying her name as a flag over a war that has older origins and a very different target. So here is where I land. Laura Lopes made a mistake. In a high-stakes room with a complicated history already running underneath the floorboards, she let something unfiltered through. That is real. The consequences of it are hers to face, and I am not here to argue otherwise. But the lesson I want you to take from this story is not simply about watching your words around powerful people. That is too easy, and it lets the system off the hook entirely. The deeper lesson is about what happens when someone is included, just enough to be present, but never enough to feel secure. When an institution uses proximity as a substitute for acknowledgement. When a person performs grace and diplomacy for 20 years inside a structure that has never once formally said, "You belong here," that kind of invisible pressure does not disappear. It accumulates, and when it finally surfaces, the institution calls it disrespect. But sometimes what looks like disrespect from the outside is exhaustion breaking through on the inside. William is now building the monarchy he will one day lead. And the choice he makes in response to this moment, measured accountability or the slow machinery of quiet exclusion, will say something lasting about the kind of king he intends to be. Loyalty is a virtue, but loyalty without discernment becomes punishment. And power exercised without grace corrodes the very institution it is trying to protect. That is not opinion. That is the lesson every royal family in history has eventually learned, some before it was too late, and some after. What do you think? Is William's fury justified, or is it carrying something older than this moment? Is Laura Lopes the villain of this story, or a woman who finally cracked under a weight that was never fairly distributed? I want your honest take in the comments. This is exactly the kind of conversation this channel exists for. If this video made you think, hit the like button. It genuinely helps us reach more people. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with one person who follows the royal family. And I will see you in the next one. The most important stories are always the ones they hope you won't look at too closely.